New York City on the morning of September 11th, 2001, was just like any other day. The sun was shining brightly in a clear blue sky, people were heading to work, children were going to school, and the city was full of its usual energy and noise. The iconic Twin Towers of the World Trade Center stood tall against the skyline, symbols of American strength and economic power. They were landmarks known all over the world, a familiar and reassuring sight for New Yorkers and visitors alike. No one could have imagined that this ordinary Tuesday morning would soon become one of the darkest days in the nation's history, a day that would change everything. The plan for this terrible day was created by a terrorist group called Al-Qaeda. This group was led by a man named Osama bin Laden. Al-Qaeda was angry with the United States for several reasons. They did not like American military presence in the Middle East, particularly in Saudi Arabia. They also disagreed with U.S. support for Israel and its policies towards some Muslim countries. Bin Laden and his followers believed that attacking America on its own soil would punish the country and force it to change its foreign policy. Their goal was to cause immense fear and destruction, hoping to weaken America's influence in the world and inspire others to join their cause. The terrorists' plan was calculated and cruel. 19 Al-Qaeda members were chosen to carry out the attacks. They entered the United States legally months before the attacks, living quietly and taking flying lessons at American flight school. On the morning of September 11th, they split into 4 groups and boarded 4 different commercial airplanes departing from airports on the East Coast. The planes were headed for California, meaning they were filled with a large amount of jet fuel for the long journey. The terrorists' weapon of choice was not a gun or a bomb, but the airplanes themselves, turned into guided missiles. To take control of the planes, the hijackers used simple, sharp weapons like box cutters and knives, which they had managed to get past airport security. Shortly after takeoff, they stormed the cockpits, overpowering the pilots and flight attendants. They told the passengers that they had a bomb on board to keep everyone scared and compliant. Once they had control, they turned the planes around. Instead of flying to California, they set new courses. 2 of the planes were aimed directly at the heart of New York City's financial district, the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center. The passengers and crew on those flights faced unimaginable terror, realizing their planes were now weapons. At 8:46 a.m., the first plane, American Airlines Flight 11, crashed into the North Tower of the World Trade Center. The impact was enormous, creating a massive hole high up on the building's facade and a huge fireball. People on the streets below were confused. Some thought it was a terrible accident, maybe a small plane that had lost control. But the scale of the explosion and the thick black smoke that began pouring from the tower suggested something far worse. Inside the building, thousands of people were trapped above the impact zone, while others began a desperate evacuation down crowded stairwells. The city's emergency services rushed to the scene, unaware of the full horror that was still to come. Just 17 minutes later at 9:03 a.m., the world watched in horror as the second plane, United Airlines Flight 175, appeared in the sky. It flew low over the city and banked sharply, heading directly for the South Tower. This was no accident. The plane slammed into the building, creating another devastating explosion that was broadcast live on television screens around the globe. At that moment, everyone knew this was a deliberate attack on the United States. The sight of the second impact confirmed the nation's worst fears and plunged New York City into a state of chaos and disbelief. The Twin Towers, once symbols of stability, were now burning monuments of terror. The damage caused by the planes was catastrophic. The immense heat from the burning jet fuel, which reached temperatures of over 1,000 degrees Celsius, began to weaken the steel support columns of the towers. The buildings were designed to withstand impacts from planes, but not the intense, sustained fires that followed. The smoke was thick and suffocating, making it impossible for those trapped on the upper floors to escape. Many people made heartbreaking choices in their final moments. The situation was dire, and the structural integrity of the massive skyscrapers was failing much faster than anyone could have predicted. At 9:59 a.m., after burning for nearly an hour, the South Tower could no longer support its own weight. The floors began to pancake, one on top of the other, and the entire 110-story building collapsed into a massive cloud of dust and debris. The sight was surreal and terrifying. Then, at 10:28 a.m., the North Tower, the first to be hit, also collapsed. The iconic structures were gone, replaced by a mountain of twisted steel and concrete. The collapse sent a colossal cloud of smoke and ash through the streets of Lower Manhattan, engulfing everything and everyone in its path, turning day into night for those on the ground. The immediate reaction in New York City was one of pure shock and panic. As the towers fell, a wave of dust and debris rushed through the streets, forcing people to run for their lives. Many were covered head to toe in gray ash, looking like ghosts emerging from a disaster film. The sounds of sirens filled the air as firefighters, police officers, and paramedics rushed toward the danger, many of them running into the burning buildings to save others. These brave first responders showed incredible courage, and sadly, 343 firefighters and 71 law enforcement officers lost their lives that day, making the ultimate sacrifice while trying to help. Across the United States and around the world, people were glued to their televisions watching the unbelievable events unfold. It was a moment of shared shock and sorrow. Leaders from countries all over the globe quickly condemned the attacks and offered their support to the American people. For a time, it felt as if the entire world stood in solidarity with the United States. In cities from London to Sydney, people held vigils and laid flowers at American embassies. This global outpouring of sympathy showed that the attack was not just on America, but on the values of freedom and peace shared by many nations. In the hours and days that followed, a powerful sense of unity emerged across America. Politics were put aside and people came together to support one another. American flags appeared on houses, cars, and street corners everywhere as a symbol of defiance and patriotism. People lined up for hours to donate blood, and volunteers traveled to New York from all over the country to help with the rescue and recovery efforts at what became known as Ground Zero. This spirit of togetherness, born from tragedy, showed the resilience of the American people in the face of unimaginable loss. The stories of heroism and survival from that day are countless. There were office workers who carried their colleagues down dozens of flights of stairs to safety. There were boat captains who organized a spontaneous maritime evacuation, transporting 500,000 people from Lower Manhattan by water. And there were the passengers of United Airlines Flight 93, another hijacked plane, who learned about the attacks in New York and Washington and fought back against their hijackers. Their brave actions forced the plane to crash in a field in Pennsylvania, preventing it from hitting its intended target, believed to be the U.S. Capitol or the White House. In the wake of 9/11, life in America changed in significant ways. The most immediate and visible change was at airports. Airport security became much stricter to prevent similar attacks from ever happening again. The Transportation Security Administration, or TSA, was created, and travelers now have to go through enhanced screening processes, including removing shoes and limiting liquids in carry-on bags. Cockpit doors on airplanes were reinforced to make them impossible to break into from the cabin. These changes, while sometimes inconvenient, became a normal part of travel in the post-9/11 world, all designed to keep passengers safe. The attacks also led to major shifts in U.S. foreign policy. In response to the attacks, President George W. Bush declared a war on terror. The main goal was to find and dismantle Al-Qaeda and other terrorist organizations. This led to the U.S. military invading Afghanistan in October 2001, as the country's ruling Taliban government was sheltering Osama bin Laden and his fighters. The war would last for 2 decades. The U.S. also passed new laws like the Patriot Act, which gave the government more power to surveil communications to track potential terrorist threats, sparking a long-running debate about security versus personal privacy. The emotional and psychological impact of 9/11 was profound and long-lasting. For many, the sense of safety and security was shattered. The attacks left a deep scar on the American psyche, creating a collective trauma that is still felt today. The constant news coverage of the event, the images of the falling towers, and the stories of loss were deeply ingrained in the memory of a generation. The attacks also led to a rise in prejudice and discrimination against people of Middle Eastern descent and Muslims, who were unfairly blamed for the actions of a small group of extremists. Today, we remember 9/11 every year to honor the nearly 3,000 people who lost their lives in the attacks in New York, at the Pentagon, and in Pennsylvania. Memorials have been built at each of the crash sites to ensure that the victims are never forgotten. The National September 11th Memorial and Museum at Ground Zero in New York features 2 reflecting pools and the footprints of the original towers, with the names of every victim inscribed around the edges. Remembering 9/11 is not just about looking back at a day of tragedy, it is about honoring the bravery of first responders, the unity of the country, and the enduring spirit of resilience.